Alright, so between Fairview, Lil Bush, resident of the United States, and the show that we're going to be looking at in today's video, I think it's about to become very obvious why South Park is the only successful cartoon that Comedy Central has ever had. It's a bit odd, isn't it? When you think of Fox, there are several different cartoons that pop up in your head. When you think of Adult Swim, there are several different cartoons that pop up in your head. When you think of Comedy Central, you think of South Park, and only South Park. No other cartoon comes up on your head, it's just South Park. Okay, and to a lesser extent, a significantly lesser extent drawn together, but that's about it. I can't help but notice that these three shows are all kind of derivative of South Park in their own ways. With Fairview, you have the whole aspect of seeing what life is like in this small town, in this small community. The only difference being, instead of South Park, it's Fairview. Totally original, totally new concept, do not steal. And then the latter two shows take the edgy, offensive style of comedy that South Park has, and unfortunately they both fail at successfully replicating that style. It's very interesting to me, the idea that these people went into Comedy Central, pitched these shows expecting them to become the next South Park, because that's really what these feel like. I guess in a way it kind of makes sense. South Park is Comedy Central's flagship show. It's also the only cartoon they have, the only successful cartoon that they have. And so in a way it kind of makes sense that all these other people, they want to try and copy South Park. They want their show to become the next South Park. It's kind of the same thing with Fox when you really think about it. They made a very successful, very acclaimed cartoon about a dysfunctional family, and so by coincidence, I don't know if it is a coincidence or not, it feels more like a coincidence than with Comedy Central, almost every subsequent Fox cartoon would follow the dysfunctional family formula that The Simpsons started. King of the Hill, Seth MacFarlane's 3 cartoons, Bob's Burgers, even some of the short-lived, forgotten cartoons follow the formula. So in a way, I kind of see it, When a network has a flagship show, I guess it makes sense that some people want to make their own version of that flagship show. The problem is, though, you run the risk, more likely than not, of having your show be a failure. And so today, we're going to be looking at one such failure. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Legends of Chamberlain Heights. This is a short-lived Comedy Central cartoon that ran for 2 seasons from 2016 to 2017. I remember this show came out in the latter half of 2016, around the same time the Nut Shack was becoming this massive meme on the internet. You look at both shows and they are very similar in quality. I mean, obviously this show is far worse than the Nut Shack. This show doesn't come close to being as good as the Nut Shack. This doesn't have the funny bad quality that the Nut Shack has, but the vibes are definitely similar between the two shows. Not a lot of people acknowledged it, but I remember there were a few people that took note of how funny it was that at the time there was this brand new cartoon that was about to come out on Comedy Central that somehow looked worse than this extremely obscure cartoon from almost a decade ago that no one knew it existed until very recently, when it started gaining infamy on the internet. And then there was this brand new cartoon that was about to come out that somehow looked worse. I don't know why, but I feel like there's something weirdly perfect, weirdly beautiful having this show come out around the same time that the Nut Shack was becoming a meme online. Again though, as I mentioned before, Legends of Chamberlain Heights is unfortunately nowhere near as funny bad as the Nut Shack. In all honesty, I think this show reminds me a lot more of the Slim Shady show, which I find to be a lot more pathetic in a way. Legends of Chamberlain Heights is a proper cartoon. It has a bigger, more professional team behind it, and it aired on television. It aired on a major television network. So it's just extra pathetic to think that quality-wise, it's on par with this extremely obscure, low-budget web cartoon from the very early 2000s. You take one quick look at the Slim Shady show, and it's pretty easy to conclude, yeah, this had a very small team behind it. And then you look back on Legends of Chamberlain Heights, and it's somehow on par with the quality of the Slim Shady show. This considerably more recent show that had a bigger team behind it and aired on a major television network, somehow it's on par with the Slim Shady show in terms of quality. Damn. The most surprising thing is, though, this show is not funny bad like the Nut Shack as previously established. However, it's not offensively bad either, like the Slim Shady show. I'm genuinely just as surprised as y'all are. You take one quick look at this art style and it's like, how the hell do you think this is going to be good, let alone even remotely tolerable? But to my surprise, even though Legends of Chamberlain Heights is garbage, it's kind of tolerable garbage. Even if the art style says otherwise, I really gotta stop judging books by their cover, I know. So the show follows the adventures of three boys named Grover, Jamal, and Milk, who, similarly to the main characters of Lil Bush, feel very derivative of the four main characters of South Park. I will say though, I kinda like the chemistry between the three main characters of the show. I think they have the potential to be funny. I'm not saying they are funny, I'm saying they have that potential. I could see them being funny characters. The whole thing with the odd one out of the group, Milk, is that he's white, but he tries to be black. He pretends to be black. He does everything he can to convince himself that he is black, even though he clearly isn't. He tries to gain street cred, hood cred, whatever, but in reality, he grew up living in a nice mansion. Again, it's not very funny in the actual show. The execution isn't funny, but I think the idea of it could be funny. The idea of it could work, maybe. I'm not sure how I could be able to further elaborate on this, but I do see potential in these three characters being funny. I do kind of like the chemistry between them. It could be funny seeing them together, and yet it isn't for some reason. Well, actually, there's a few reasons I could think of as to why it's not funny. This show feels very 2016, I will say that. I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, but you watch this show and yeah, it feels very much like a show that would air in 2016. This show ran from 2016 to 2017 and it shows. There are no other years where this show could have aired. As if that wasn't enough, this show sometimes includes references that like you watch the show now and it's like, oh yeah, this was definitely made in 2016. There's an episode where Grover enters a video game tournament and like he wins one of the practice rounds, I believe, and he could be seen dabbing, and it's like, yeah, that's how you know this was made in 2016. God, remember when dabbing was a big thing? You know, I don't know what it was, but like dabbing felt like it was gonna be like this big thing that would have longevity, and now it's just completely disappeared. I completely forgot about it until I watched this show. Chances are y'all forgot about it until now. I know that a lot of like novelty dance moves, if you can even call the dab a dance move, I know they don't last very long, which is why they're considered novelty dance moves. But I don't know, I always felt like there was gonna be this longevity to dabbing when compared to like Gangnam Style or Whippin' Nae Nae or whatever. And then by either 2018 or 2019, dabbing was completely dead. I don't know, it's just this like, it was everywhere, everyone was doing it back in the mid-2010s, and then it just kind of disappeared, and somehow we just never acknowledged that, yeah, it disappeared. I don't know, it's a very weird thing that I think about now because of this show. I'm getting off topic though, I apologize for that. So as I mentioned before, this show only lasted 2 seasons from 2016 to 2017, with each season having 10 episodes, so you have 20 episodes in total. I watched all 10 episodes of season 1, and then I only watched like the first 2 or so episodes of season season 2. And I've gotta be honest with y'all, this show is surprisingly kind of tolerable. Not good, but tolerable. I know that's very surprising considering the fact that the show looks like this, but I surprisingly didn't find it to be as insufferable as I expected it. But that wasn't the case at first. The first episode of the series is easily the worst one, although to be fair, I didn't bother watching much of season 2, so maybe there's a slight chance season 2 has an episode worse. But the first episode, I think, is the worst episode of the show for one simple reason. It has nothing to do with the plot of the episode, it has nothing to do with that. It is filled to the brim with gross out jokes. Now, I can't show any of these jokes for obvious reasons, but yeah, episode 1 has a lot of these gross out jokes, and you combine that with the extremely unappealing art style, and yeah, that's not a very good combo. It genuinely made me dread what the rest of the show would be like. I thought the rest of the show was just gonna be this unappealing, unfunny, gross out show. But to my surprise, none of the subsequent episodes had that much gross out humor in it. That's not to say that the subsequent episodes are clear of gross out humor, because yes, from time to time, there are trashy, gross out jokes thrown in, but not as much as in the first episode. Much like with Lil Bush, this show just has this very trashy feel to it. It feels a bit different from Lil Bush though. I don't know how I could be able to elaborate on this. I don't know how much sense this is gonna make, but I feel like there's a very clear, noticeable difference between 2007 trashy and 2016 trashy. You watch Lil Bush and you just know, oh yeah, for sure, this came out in 2007. You just know it. And it's the same thing with this, where again, this feels very much like a 2016 cartoon. And once again, even though I understand that this show is supposed to be trashy with its humor, that doesn't make it funny. I'm not going to criticize the show because it's supposed to have this trashy feel, but I'm not going to call it funny either. I gotta be honest, this is one of those self-explanatory bad cartoons. It's hard for me to criticize this because it just kind of speaks for itself. Just one quick look at the art style and it says everything. And I gotta be honest, I hate looking at these kinds of shows. I would rather look at something that I could be able to elaborate on why it's bad. It's so boring to me looking at a self-explanatory bad cartoon because it's like it doesn't really take much to know why it's bad. And then you combine that with the very whatever feel that I have watching this show. This isn't funny bad. It's not offensively bad, except for the first episode. It's kind of boring more than anything else. In a way, I kinda would have preferred if the rest of the show had the same offensively bad quality that the first episode had, because at least then there would be more for me to say about the show. At least I could go into detail. Sometimes there are cartoons that I've looked at that are like very self-explanatory as to why they're bad, and yet I go into detail about why they're bad regardless. It's extremely obvious why Control-Alt-Delete is bad, and yet at the same time it's fun talking about why it's bad. That's not the case with this show. More than anything else, I just felt kind of bored watching this show. There's never a funny bad moment. You know, sometimes these shows, like, there are rare occasions where they can have a funny bad moment. There's nothing like that here. Maybe there's like one genuinely funny joke in this show, I don't remember. I surprisingly don't doubt the possibility that one episode of the show that I watched had a joke in it that I found funny, but I'm not gonna bother rewatching the show to find that joke, assuming it exists. At the same time, I'm not offended by the quality of this show, even though this show has one of the most visually unappealing art styles I've seen for any cartoon. It's not like offensively bad, it's just in the middle. It's not funny bad, it's not offensively bad, it's boring bad, which I think is the worst kind of bad in a way. I guess it could be a little bit funny looking at how much this show desperately tries to be the next South Park. Like, you just look at the overall feel and style of this show and it's like, yeah, they're clearly trying to be like South Park. But even then, eventually, the novelty of that kind of goes away. And at the end of the day, what you end up getting is your average bad adult cartoon, except this one does something a little bit differently. Instead of ripping off Family Guy, it rips off South Park. Wow, what a huge difference. Something notable that I want to bring up about this show is there is one episode that seemingly predicted Kobe Bryant's death in early 2020. I'm not joking about this either. I'm being 100% serious. This is real. There's an episode of the show where the internet gets shut down throughout the world, and so all of these like riots and stuff end up happening. And so as the three main characters are trying to get to safety, they end up stumbling upon a crashed helicopter with Kobe Bryant in it. As we all know, in January of 2020, Kobe Bryant would end up dying in a helicopter crash, and this was all the way back in 2016 when this episode aired. I believe when people first noticed this, Comedy Central issued out a statement saying, "Please don't share this clip around out of respect for those who lost their lives in that helicopter crash." And I'm not bringing this up to be disrespectful or anything like that. I'm bringing it up because it's honestly kind of eerie more than anything else. Unfortunately, that's the only really interesting thing about this show. That's the only noteworthy thing about it. What I'm ultimately left with is a very self-explanatory cartoon. A cartoon that is bad, but it just feels redundant to explain why it's bad. It gives me nothing. It gives me no material to work with. It's not fun talking about why this show is bad. You just take one look at the show's art style and it's like, yeah, there's no way this show is good. In what world is this show good? As far as bad adult cartoons go, this isn't the worst one I've seen, but it's also not the best one I've seen either. It's tolerable, but it's also really boring at the same time. And so as a result of that, there's almost nothing interesting to say about this show. Nothing notable. It speaks for itself as to why it's bad. It's a short-lived South Park clone from the mid-2010s that very much feels like a cartoon from the mid-2010s, and then it became immediately forgotten about the moment it was cancelled. In retrospect, maybe it was a bad idea to look at two short-lived South Park knockoffs from Comedy Central back to back. I feel like I would have a lot more to say about this show if it weren't for the fact that I looked at Lil Bush in the previous episode. At the same time though, maybe that's not the case, you know, sometimes something is just boring. Sometimes something is just self-explanatory and, you know, you really can't do much about it. You really can't do much about it at all. Anyways, that's about it. If you enjoyed this video, then be sure to like, and if you're new to the channel, maybe consider subscribing as it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you everyone for watching this video, and I will see you all next time. Adios.